In mid-2017, I found myself ready for a new job opportunity. I put my application out at a few places, and one of those places was Uber. And the first part of my interview and application at Uber went pretty well. They assessed me and got back to me and said that they found I was pretty promising, but wanted to see more UX thinking demonstrated in my work. I had showed them a portfolio, but the portfolio that I had at the time didn't have very many UX design or product design projects in it. So they gave me a take-home assignment. Now, usually I'm not a big fan of take-home assignments in job interviews, but I was at the end of the process of interviewing. They found me really promising. I really wanted the job, and so I agreed to do it. So what I'm going to show you in this video is the take-home assignment that I did. I'm not going to go super in depth into the actual problem that I was solving in the design challenge, but more just kind of show you my process, my way of thinking, and how I approached this take-home assignment. So here's the take-home assignment that Uber gave me. They mentioned that they were really interested in how I would approach a design problem, evaluate possible solutions, and then also communicate that understanding to others, so how I would present this work. A traveler has landed at San Francisco Airport and needs to find her checked bag. Create a lo-fi interaction flow that helps the traveler find her bag from a mobile app. So they mentioned they wanted to see this in a presentation form, and then also included some tips and guide as to what my presentation should include. So I started this by taking to my notebook and really jotting out my ideas, my thoughts, and I thought it was good to start on paper because it also helps give you a bit of freedom. I didn't want to hold myself back, so I also start by going really wide and letting myself think about all the different possible ways that I could approach or solve this problem. So the first thing I started with was setting myself a big goal at the top, and you can see that I adjusted this goal a little bit to make sure that I stayed really focused. Then I went into the different potential ideas and different solutions that I could possibly explore for this experience. Then I looked at how the traveler might be feeling at that point in time, because I think it's really important to consider what the scenario, environment, situation, and feelings your user might have at that particular moment where they're going to interact with your experience. Then I wrote down 3 kind of micro goals, and these are more goals of the user, whereas the first goal at the top is sort of the goal for the whole project. So these are some micro goals I set, and you can see I prioritized them in red from 1 to 3, just so that I could always look back and refer to these when I'm working on this experience. So I thought about various assumptions, different trade-offs that I could have, and then also requirements and constraints. And I think it's important to set yourself these, otherwise it's really easy for you to go quite wide and create this end-to-end perfect experience. But I really wanted to stay focused and give myself some constraints. Otherwise I feel like I could just be designing forever. Then I explored a couple of different user journeys and different sort of flows. And you can see here I'm like totally letting myself think as far and wide as I want to go. And then later on, I'm coming back and crossing out the things that I think are unnecessary for this particular experience. Then I got to wireframing and drawing, and even though I'm a designer, I am not a particularly good drawer. It's basically just boxes, and you can see here I'm thinking about what information should be shown on each screen, which information to prioritize, and then also how to lay out and order that information on these screens. Another thing I considered is pain points, priorities, and then also empathizing with the user. So here I am doing some terrible drawing and thinking about how the user is feeling throughout the journey. So I'm documenting the journey, and then I'm also thinking about how they're feeling and then illustrating that as well, just to help give some extra context. Next was the user stories. So I went into a few different user stories. Essentially, I wrote down 2 to 3 user stories that I thought were really important for this experience. And then from here, I went into the design tool. And the design tool that I used for this exercise was Atomic, which is a design and prototyping tool. I will show you later on the presentation the final UI and flow and wireframes that I presented. So let's jump now into the presentation that I showed and walk through how I put all of this information together. Okay, so I called this Find My Bag, and I started the presentation with the goal. I think this is the best place to start because it's really hard to justify all of your decisions and create an experience without having a really strong goal in mind. So then I mentioned the micro goals that I talked about earlier. These are the goals of the user, and then also the different tasks that this person might do. So then we dive into the design process. So the first part takes a deep dive into understanding the user and looks at forming the user stories and articulating her journey. So here I noted how the user might be feeling at that particular point in time which they might be using this application. Then I went into what her priorities are, and then I mentioned the pain points briefly as they can help you make decisions into how you could mitigate these pain points. Okay, the next section is the user stories, and I chose my 2 strongest user stories that I thought were most important. Then I walked through the journey, so what this person is taking before, during, and potentially you could even go into after they've interacted with your app or your experience. So I also showed photos of my notes because I felt like that really helped show my actual process and how I would go about approaching this problem, which in my case is sometimes sketching, drawing, writing things down, creating terrible looking drawings. So then the second part of the process. Here I'm addressing the particular things that Uber asked me to consider when I did this assignment. So I talked about the different requirements, one of them being that I want the app to be reliable and display accurate information, and the second being that it should be usable and understanding of the user scenarios. Okay, next is a list of assumptions. Then I went into the constraints as well that I wanted to have for this project. I also made a few trade-offs. In real life, this could take months to design and develop, so I wanted to make some trade-offs to keep the experience really, really simple. But I made sure to note them here so that it was clear that it wasn't that I wasn't thinking about these things, I just consciously chose not to include them. So then I showed the different sort of scenarios and journeys that I was thinking of for the app. And the first one, like I showed you earlier, I cut a lot of things out of it because I felt like it was getting really long and really complex. So instead I ended up with this really simplified flow, which I felt better solved the problem and zoomed into that particular problem statement. So the last part of the process is the wireframing and prototyping the user experience. So I made sure to restate the 3 main goals, and then I started showing the design. And I purposefully kept this really low fidelity. I didn't get too carried away with creating a visual language or a UI design. The most important thing here was to show that I could solve a problem and create a product design experience for it. The experience starts with scanning a barcode that should load and bring up your bag that hopefully has arrived. This middle screen here is like a quick glance, but if you want more information, you can view details about your bag. That's the 3rd screen here. So that was the basic flow. I then created an interactive prototype, which sadly I don't have access to it anymore, so I can't show you, but it was basically showing the basic transitions and how you could click through and explore the prototype. Then lastly, I included a visualized flow of how this whole experience works. And that's it. You might find it surprising that I didn't submit super flashy UI design or flashy animations. I kept it very simple, and I spent most of the presentation focused on uncovering the goals, setting assumptions, user stories, user journey, and there was only a small portion on what the actual final experience looked like visually. Hopefully you found this video helpful. Maybe you're working on an assignment right now, or you might have to in the future. If you have any extra questions about how to approach these kind of take-home assignments, then feel free to leave a comment or ask me on Twitter, and I'll try my best to help you out. See you next time. Bye.